Of Transformation Leaders Podcast. I'm David Soden. My co-host Sean Ennis is with us. And today we're going to be talking about a little bit of Gartner information, specifically around the AI bubble, and asking questions about where we think the meets, the bounds, or the ceiling, or the floor is on all of this. So to kind of kick off things, Sean, give me a quick overview as to what you think this AI bubble is, define it for folks, and then kind of, let's lead us into the next area of topic for discussion.
Certainly. One of the most confusing things in GenAI is what is GenAI, right? What is AI? I don't know how many times people are like, Sean, GenAI is when software automatically figure out what's going on and does it. I'm like, no. That is artificial general intelligence, which isn't here yet. So way back in the day, Moses's version of the AI was if-else statements. They were called expert systems, right? And people would go through and say, if you see this, do that. And if you look back at my career, I built a whole program in software and a software company based upon an expert system, which is rules-based. So rules-based was artificial intelligence. Somebody would go down and write if, else all day long. Then someone came up with something called machine learning, which is just a fancy word for statistics, right? Where somebody would go through and they would run data into this algorithm, and the algorithm would eventually create essentially another algorithm, or the machine created an algorithm so that if you were to send future pieces of data to it, it would respond in kind. This was machine learning. And then somebody went through and said, hey, I can hit a button on my desktop, do a whole bunch of stuff, and hit save, and then hit play, and it'll do it over and over again. And this is where RPA came into place. When we talk about generative AI, I like to focus really on what OpenAI has brought to the table with GPT. And that started with GPT-3, where this is machine learning, definitely, with a large language model. And this is where they take data from the internet and crunch it all together into a single model. And they use something called transformers to be able to take text and relate it to that machine learning large language model. So it's completely different. This is where everybody's been focusing on, because to be able to use this model, you need to take whatever you're doing and crunch it and put it in the model to use further. A lot of people are adding their data to large language models. Or, more commonly, is the read. Is I need to take a query and I need to crunch that and run an inference model. And this is how it works. This creates an enormous amount of work to do from a CPU perspective. And companies like NVIDIA have catapulted into valuation from being worth less than $1 trillion to being the most expensive valued company on Wall Street, like $4 trillion, beating Google, Amazon, Microsoft. So, this is certainly the concept. Now, when we talk about bubbles, this means, in my parlance, my parlance, a bubble is an inflated set of expectations. So, this is where maybe I've been aligned to Gartner for too long, but I don't know if you've ever seen the Gartner hype curve. David, do you have their 2023? This is what's been online.
I do.
And this is the hype curve. So they said last year generative AI was all the way up at the top. And what I'm seeing above all else is that people have an inflated level of expectations when it comes to generative AI.
I,
They think it's a magic wand.
I was going to
um,
sort of general misunderstanding, I think, is driving a lot of that too.
yes. And I mean, certainly, David, when it comes down to inflated expectations for generative AI, I'm sure you have seen it as well.
Yeah, there's definitely the misunderstanding about kind of what it is. And usually when I'm having conversations with folks, I try to reframe some things in kind of a more consolidated or condensed way, at least for people to get their mind's eye around it. It's not the at all be all, but when you're trying to help people that are struggling, I found it best to simply describe it one of two ways, or just think of a left side and a right side. There is the mentality of generative AI, meaning I ask a question, I get a response. But then there's that more data analysis, data perspective analysis, and you can still write a prompt to have it analyze data, but you're getting more into a different way that the algorithm in the large language model, because it's internal to itself, it's like a switch, and it's trying to figure out which mode it needs to be in. And this really comes down to prompt engineering. So if you know how to trigger the right keywords, you can flip the internal switch to make it go into an analysis mode versus a generative mode. And so that's usually the way that I like to explain that to folks. And the other misconception that is probably the largest, and this comes true for developers too, because they're responsible for executing it or working with project leaders. And if they don't know until it's too late, they can't get ahead of it, and they wind up kind of behind the eight ball in these projects. And the other thing is the thing about determinism or deterministic queries, meaning if I ask the AI something and it generates me some text, that if I come back tomorrow and I generate the same question, the expectation is that it will be deterministic. I will get the same answer back verbatim. And that is not true. They are working on that AI, generative AI, or for those that are watching or viewing live right now that have used it. I want you to keep in mind that there's this one little switch parameter that you pass in there called a seed. And what it does is it says, hey, I want you to reference this seed, which is essentially kind of a mark in time that says this is when I gave this answer. So they are trying to nail down deterministic responses more consistently, a little bit more. But generally, by and large, as if it is right now, the expectation needs to be set that if you personally ask me a question and I answer it today, that when I answer it, the same question when you ask me tomorrow, I'll give you the same generalized answer, but it will not be verbatim, word for word, exactly what I said today. And so as long as you're okay with that framing, then you should proceed forward. If for some whatever reason you have a requirement where determinism or deterministic outcomes of the response needs to be unequivocally the same as it was yesterday and into the future, then you need to put a stake or a flag there and hold off for a little bit, because we're not quite there yet. And I think that is, at least for my involvement, I've seen a lot of contention around that, and then trying to explain that up the stack that gets really, really, really confusing. And I think this is part of the fueling where they get in, they're in there too far, then they need to pull back or pause. And so the rapid progression that they thought they were going to make is starting to, be realized as more and more companies get into the weeds of all of this. Sean, what are some of the feedback mechanisms that either that you're reading or from the folks that you're talking to, what challenges are you seeing?
A lot of people are unfortunately seeing generative AI as this is a new thing. We've never seen anything like this before. And as somebody who has made it my career to travel this curve that you see on the screen right now, this has been my career, helping people get through this curve. Because in the very beginning, everybody wants to talk about it. Once we're at the peak of inflated expectations like generative AI, people are like, hey, we have to use it. we have to use it, right?
Yeah.
And then when you get into the trough of disillusionment, you'll get people saying, hey, the bottom line is this just doesn't work, right? When in fact it does. Um, and then you get to that plateau. And so, you see here, Gartner last year says it's going to be 5 to 10 years before generative AI really hits maturity. I mean, so 4 to 9 years from now. So you're talking about 2028
Yep.
in their mind before we have a belief that Gen AI is a known quantity. Now, if you remember, like citizen developers, this was on there last year, right? Blockchain, this was on here. So you've got Web3, like all of these things have gone through this curve and now have gotten to their plateau. Now, some plateaus are bigger than others. Whether it be mobile computing, 5G, virtual network function virtualization. All of these things have been on the curve before. So the first thing that I kind of let people know is calm down. This is just like we've done before. For the most part, when you talk about generative AI, it is no different than talking about any other cloud-based service. For the most part,
Correct.
really, generative AI is much more valuable under the hood than face to face. I doubt you'll be bringing to market something better than what ChatGPT is, right?
Yep.
But everybody, as a famous person once said to me, niches make you riches. So, when it comes to your niche, you want to be able to drive value in your niche. And what generative AI is extremely valuable at doing is giving you at a cost value bump. I talked to a client, they're like, Sean, we're in a very crowded space. We want to be able to differentiate ourselves. We want to be able to do it quickly and get to market really quick. So we worked with them to implement a uh, uh, a generative AI interface into their offering, and they saw immediate benefit from that. Now, are they going to keep that feature long term? Who knows? But being able to turnkey add value quickly, generative AI has incredible value in that arena. Now, it is, you know, I love your take on this, David. 4 to 9 years. 4 to 9 years. You think uh, this is what Gartner is saying here, that
Yep.
4 to 9 years is when we will actually know and have a quantitative value on generative AI. Do you think that's ambitious or do you think that's overly conservative?
So when I first saw this chart, the first thing that came to mind is Godfrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. This is
Mhm.
an inverted style of that. If just take the chart, flip it around the other way. These are the early adopters at the top of the curve, right? They're trying to test the meets and the bounds. The way that I see this, at least in my timeline, so I have agreement and I have some disagreement and a lot of ignorance because that's anything into the future, right? We all just don't know. We're all just guessing. But I think it depends on your implementation type, how much budget you have, what your risk tolerance is, what your infrastructure as far as personnel are, meaning you have to put a lot of, and I'm going to go back to this human centricity thing that I mentioned time and time and again. You need to implement AI responsibly. That means that AI shouldn't be replacing your staff. If you find that you want to replace your staff with AI, you're not implementing AI right, and you're putting your company at a huge risk. So that will accelerate it for your use case, but the danger in that is going to lend itself to all of the negativity around AI. So a lot of it's going to come from basically everything that I just said, but the tolerance and how fast you want to drive it. You need to find that sweet spot between being conservative enough to protect yourself, but not so conservative that you dig yourself in a hole. So you literally need to take a centrist approach in your methodology of implementation. The other thing too is that 2022, late 2022, around November, December, when ChatGPT first was announced and became all the rage, we find that a lot of people were just coming up to speed. By April or May of the following year in 2023, like everybody was like, oh my God, this is the best thing since sliced cheese. How do I get a hold of it? How do I play with it? How can we implement it? What does it mean for our business? And everything went out. So the rest of the year remained in that mindset. And then in 2024 through 2025, I personally see and am predicting that this is the year of implementation. People are putting together POCs. People are putting together trials. They're testing those meets in the bound. They want more information. They need to see, what does it mean for me? And at the end of the day, how do I quantify its existence? How much does it cost? I've seen some larger companies think right out of the gate, oh, I've got to create a customized version of this. I need my own large language model. We need to fine tune this to no end, only to find out that if you want to fine tune a model, you better have some pretty deep pockets, because capacity is at an all-time low, which is what's driving the concerns around how green generative AI is, how much money we're wasting in it, how bad it is for the planet. And it's, again, we're in our infancies. We're all just learning. So this is part of that responsible AI conversation in, just because you can put the pedal to the metal and go 150 miles an hour down the freeway doesn't mean you should. Doesn't mean it's wise or safe, not only for yourself in the car, but for others that you could collide in and against. And if you're listening to this as a leader, and with kind of the frame of our podcast, you want to make sure that you take everybody along for the ride and you enhance what it is that you're doing, ultimately for your employees. Make their lives easier. Have it so that they do more with less. Increase the output and the information available to customers. Make that customer experience much better. And these are the ways in the framing that I think that people should really, really take a focus on. One of the things that I did see, Sean, is that I pulled, if you don't mind, if I switch slides real quick. I want to, this is a segue. I'm going to make this bigger so that everybody can read. And I just found this chart this morning, which is a newer chart from January 2024. There is a new centralized area that's near and dear to Gartner's heart called this AI TRISM. And it's really focused around trust, risk, security management, hence the TRISM model there. And it's really about doing a big focus essentially on governance, trustworthiness, and things of that nature, with the ultimate goal of data protection. From the folks that you've talked to, from the engagements of the people that you've worked with, which of these items that you see, and just kind of to lay the land, if you look at the top right corner, there's a range. So what they're trying to illustrate here is everything in the middle is happening now and today. And as we go out over the circle, this is the future, out to essentially 6 to 8 years. So another way of looking at the chart, but a little bit differently and a little bit more updated with some different categorizations. What is some of the feedback that you've received, and how true is this graphic to those conversations that you're having in your experience?
Yeah. I mean, again, part of the challenge that you get with these type of graphs is this may be Gartner's belief of the technology, but I like to tell clients that any business solution, which is required for a business problem, involves 3 pillars. And this only talks about one of them. So when you want to solve a problem, you need people, process, and tools, right? And this is the technology, the tools part. It isn't talking about the process, which is different from every different client I talk to. And then certainly the people are going to be different and are continue to be different as people go about the world. So when it comes down to some of these, you've got the LLMs multimodal. this is something that I'm seeing as extremely desirable for redundancy. A lot of people are having to do hosted large language models just because they need to have redundancy. They don't trust the redundancy because, frankly, at least a half an hour of downtime a month on OpenAI. That's been my experience out in the industry. And they're not the only ones. I've seen this across the board. Whatever you deploy, there's going to be redundancy and resilience challenges. So having multimodal makes sense. The other thing you certainly have here and are talking about is, and I talked about the $4 trillion. If a company does one thing and they're worth $4 trillion, how many other companies are going to get into there, right? And offer competition. And I know, David, you're a big Grok fan. But AI chips. Microsoft is building them into laptops. Um, Apple is putting them into our phones. So there's going to be inference models at the edge side to be able to accelerate um, AI usage in the terms of generative AI and inference. So yeah, this is going to be constantly changing. But for me, what I'd like everybody to understand, when it comes to a bubble, it's all fine and dandy. I know I made a great career riding the bubble of the dot bomb, but when it pops, that's really the important thing to know. Are we in a bubble? I think we could say we are. The question is where is it going to pop? When is it going to pop? Why is it going to pop? I personally believe the number one reason that's going to make us fall into that trough of disillusionment, and I see it on a regular basis, is that people have been sold on the concept of we're going to replace people with AI. And this is the same conversation that I've had 10, 20 years ago when people said, Sean, we're going to move everything to the cloud. So we're going to shut down our data center, we're going to remove our servers, and it's going to save us so much money. Well, once you get to the cloud, right, they come back to me and say, Sean, you know what? We're having problems because we're spending way more than when we had a physical data center. And I'm like, well, part of this game that's played is, yes, it will be cheaper, but it will also add incredible amount of flexibility.
Yep.
It's going to drive whole new value curves. Yep. And it's going to be so easy and turnkey to consume. You're actually going to spend more. So if anybody thinks generative AI is going to quote unquote save them money in the long term, they're not right. What they need to be thinking about is we need to generate more value,
yes,
and generate at a lower price more value. Because that is really the confusing part that I think that's going to cause this. So many people have implemented this technology and did it without thinking about the process, without thinking about the people. To your point earlier, David, right? And they get disillusioned that, hey, this was supposed to be my magic wand. Where's Harry Potter?
He's in that invisibility cloak, I think, I'm afraid. But you hit the topic on something, and I would highly encourage leaders that are listening to consider this move or this paradigm about value. Sean made an excellent point about that. I want you to ponder this thought. I'm not suggesting you do it, but I want you to ponder the thought minimally. And that is, if you can bring more value to your customer because you lower your operational costs, then potentially you can compete at a higher level with your competitors, because if you have a lower operating costs and your competitors aren't implementing the technology stack the way that you're implementing it, so they get that same operational reduction and benefit, if you could lower your price by some percentage point, you figure out what that might be, you could simply outprice and squeeze out your competition quite simply by just looking to deliver more value. So higher value, less cost. Imagine the delight of every consumer in the planet that is consuming your services. And unfortunately, this will bring about more competition. So then your competitors will try to figure out what's going to happen. And this is kind of essentially how, the whole thing goes. The reason I'm saying to consider this is because your competitors are considering this. And if you don't consider this and act on it, or at least test a segment of your market. So if you're a global organization, test it in a particular market. You guys are already doing this now. Segmented marketing, lots of different strategies around that, but test the waters with the theory. See what type of mileage you get. Look at the data around that. Use generative AI in the data analysis too, as well, to help you with the forecasting. Because that's one of the things personally I have, in a tactical sense, found generative AI to be really good at forecasting. And then follow it up with why, because now you'll see what the AI is thinking. Again, human centricity. You as a business leader, you know your business better than anybody else. You'll see some half truths, you'll see some full truths, and you'll also run across occasionally some things that make you go, I haven't thought about that, or I haven't thought about it in that way. And so this is really the value that you bring up in using generative AI, not only in the generation of it, but also in the analysis to kind of close the loop. Because earlier I had mentioned there's really two sides of that coin. And if you can learn how to leverage the full face and the tail side of that coin, you're going to be light years ahead, bar none. So one of the things that I did see that's here that I wanted to call out, I don't know if you look at the radial chart, you can see that around the outer perimeter, there's these categories. It's like a 5 slice in a pie. Just quickly touch base on that. So AI core technologies, to your point earlier, Sean, I think this is the most volatile area ever, because this is where NVIDIA sits. This is where Grok sits. This is where all of the other competitors sit. This is the thing that just take a deep breath, rest, lay back. It's going to happen. It's going to change whether you're ready for it or not. It is what it is. Just you're going to have to deal with it. Now, this being said, to your data center point earlier, you're talking about, hey, should I be on-prem? Should I go into the cloud? And it affords different opportunities. If you're in the cloud already fully, this is going to make your life so much easier and less costly, because the last thing you want to do is go investing in hardware for on-prem data centers or in-house data centers trying to play this AI game. I mean, can you just imagine spending a bunch of money on NVIDIA chips, and all of a sudden, in 6 weeks to 6 months, a whole new slot has come out? Your competitors are leveraging the cloud. They've got instantaneous access to it, but you're stuck with these legacy chips that you just bought, and you're trying to depreciate it in accounting by 3 years. So, this just essentially tells that story, bar none.
Well, you're going to ask yourself, are you a chip company, or are you trying to generate value? And for most of our clients, they're just looking for the value, not to own property or chips or technology or algorithms.
Which I was going to ask, which of the 5 categories do you see with the greatest potential for those watching this? Which slice should they prioritize a good chunk of their attention to, and why?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think it's the trust areas. Now, when you look at any technology, and again, I've helped people on IoT and 5G, virtual network functions, cloud, mobility, you name it. No matter what the innovation is, you need to understand where your expectations are. We talked about that. You need to understand where your business value is. What are your use cases? Now, certainly there's a lot of our clients saying, Sean, bring me 10 use cases for my industry. Like, those are fine for seed ones, but knowing your value. If you can't get somebody to help you, we help clients with that in our day job, right, David?
Yep.
So then you want to look at education. right? If you have a team that can't spell AI yet, that's okay. There's very people can get up to speed with this very quickly, right? And to your point, your competitors are doing it, so you need to do it too. But here is the next area that I would really recommend. Once you have people, once you have um, the technology, you want to start looking at, okay, how do I protect myself? Where are the guardrails?
Yep.
And that's what this is: responsible AI, ethical AI, sustainable AI, understanding that your brand is the most expensive thing you have. My father told me when I grew up, you were given one name for your whole life. Integrity is the most important thing. And I can't emphasize that enough to the people I work with, is make sure the technology you're using is done responsibly. And again, if you don't know how to figure that out, find someone who can.
Yes.
Um, the culmination is the last part, which is the approach, right? So you know what you know what you want to use to get it, you know how to get it responsibly. You need to connect the dots from, to your point earlier, this is the year where people are going to build, right? Getting from we've got a plan to we've successfully executed that plan is, again, a large part of our day job, right, David?
It
So,
is.
again, if you can't do that, find somebody who can.
Yeah, and there's always low hanging fruit too. So just as a quick sidebar example for those listening that want to know where to start. It does start with that education. So I guess that's AI enabled technologies. You need to learn about what all of that is there. But I had an example use case that came up today. So we've got some folks that are going to be out for a long period of time, and so there was a need for a particular task that this individual was doing. And so it's something that requires thought process, and that thought process is known. So in this particular use case, by no means, this is not what this person does holistically. Like, it's a small little sliver and it's incremental, or occasionally it happens. But the point is, we're able to use generative AI to automate that decision making process because we know what that is. And while we're dealing with this lull or this incapacity, the business doesn't have to stop. The business can move. And because it's agile and because we can implement it fairly quickly within, say, a day or two, and the individual that's having some challenges will be out for probably a week or more. And so the process would be seriously gummed up. And a lot of people are running, especially in today's economy, very, very lean. There's only a handful of people in these specialist categories that do very specific things. By no means am I saying that this will replace that individual by any means, because again, this is a very small part of their job description, and it's not something they do all the time. But the point is, there are certain areas to where, when this individual comes back, they would probably be delighted to have generative AI produce this because it is known. They didn't have the time to implement it themselves, and this may persist. This may be a tool for that individual now long term. And so it's caused by a catalyst, but nonetheless, this is, where you don't have to worry about the bubble, but look for these opportunities where you find yourself in a pickle. The first question you could say, okay, can we automate it? Is the process known? Is it repeatable? Is there any exception to the rule? And is the decision, if it were to be automated by an AI, what is the risk assessment level? So to your point about the trust. So, one of the things that I would say, another perspective is, if you look at that AI trust technology that you talked about, Sean, I would say the executive team, the leadership team are going to look to that. Now, if you're in the leadership team, but you're on the operational side of it, you really, at least in today's day and age, with everything that I see going on, you need to focus on that data-centric area, because analysis, RAG models, acronym for retrieval augmented generation, it's essentially where your data is, unstructured data. We had another podcast a week or two ago where we talked a little bit about that. I encourage you to go look at that. But these are the types of things where, after you've got the education and you're now moving in on it, keep your executive leadership team and your operational side focused on those two key areas for the rest of 2023 so that you can make as much progress as you possibly could think to make at least this year. And to Sean's point, if you get stuck, reach out for help. There's an abundance of folks out there that know what they're doing. I'll caveat that to say there's a bunch of folks out there that play like they know what they're doing. And then we have to go in and clean up the mess too. So it goes both ways. And so again, back to the trust, make sure you have that relationship in place. And just like we deal with humans, you need to deal with AI the exact same way. Any final or closing words, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, number one is technology that is on this curve, the height curve from Gartner. You need to understand these are shiny objects, and if you don't know how to deal with them, they will cause shiny object disease, right? And shiny object disease is the opposite of transformation. So when you're looking at transformation, first and foremost, you should decide. The business should dictate where you're doing it. And for me, because I like staying employed, I like people saying, Sean, you executed, you delivered, I'm impressed. I pick things that are digestible, right? I don't go climbing Mount Everest the first day after learning how to do mountain climbing. I go through and walk up the hill down the road, right? So, I can't emphasize enough, when you're dealing with emerging technologies, make sure that you're doing it in a business digestible way. And as David was saying, maybe you're a global company and you're just going to start with a niche from a locale perspective. Maybe you want to do an internal project with internal consumers to start with. But the important thing is to start, build expertise and confidence so that you can get the outcomes with whatever technology is. Gen AI is certainly the flavor of the year, or flavor of the decade, maybe. And yes, I think we agree we're in a bubble. So the question is what do you do? And as always, I say it's just like any other day in digital transformation, right? The same things that you have done in the past apply here, now, in the present.
Well said. Definitely well said. So I want to encourage folks, if you see on the screen right now, if you have a phone, break it out. If you have an area of expertise where you're talking about digital transformation, you're doing something interesting in the business, or maybe you have a product or service that you are doing that lends itself to transformational leadership within the organization, we'd love to have you here as a guest on the Transformation Leaders Podcast. Make sure to visit us at transformationleaderspodcast.com. There is a www in front of that. And if there's anything else that you guys want or would like to reach out to us or ask us, please hit us up on LinkedIn. I'm David Soden. That's Sean Ennis. Just search for us. You see our picture and our face here, so you should be able to find us there as well. But that's it for this episode. Thank you.